Good morning. Happy to see so many of you out this morning early on a blustery pre-blizzard morning. I'm Randy Raggio. I'm the Associate Dean and Director of the Richmond MBA program. And on behalf of Nancy Begranoff, the Dean of the Robbins School of Business, I want to welcome you to the annual Economic Breakfast. The Robbins School of Business is proud to be entering its 7th year of partnership with the Virginia Council of CEOs to conduct a quarterly economic outlook survey, and I hope you received a copy of the most recent results when you walked in. So now what I would like to do is introduce Tony Fox, who will introduce to you our moderator and panel for this morning. Tony is currently a supply planning manager at Westrock. He's a 2008 graduate of the Richmond MBA program and is currently serving as president of the Richmond Alumni Society. And so as he comes forward, I want to thank him and all the members of the Alumni Society Board for the work that they've done this year. I think they've done an outstanding job of connecting Richmond MBA alumni together with each other, with the current students, and also with the business community. And these folks are paid only in biscuits and Lou's sandwiches. So if you will, join me in thanking him and them for their service.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for being here and welcome. On behalf of the Richmond MBA and our Alumni Society, let me say how excited we are to host this event, the Economic Breakfast, the very first time as a panel. We've never done a panel before. We've done usually a solo act, so this will be the first time that you'll be able to hear from several experts and professionals on the state of the economy and what we might expect in the year to come. And I'll come back in just a moment to introduce our panel. I wanted to offer a few words about the Alumni Society first. Our group has been operating now for 7 years. Throughout this time, our board's had the benefit of working with several dedicated and selfless professionals to expand our network and provide opportunities for our alumni to connect. We operate under the presumption that a strong and active network is critical to the ongoing value that an MBA program can offer. We also partner with the business school in an advisory role, if you will, as they work to continuously review and improve their programs. We also help administer the MBA scholarship as well as annual awards for outstanding students and professors. So speaking of networking opportunities, I did want to take this time to talk about some of the events that we have coming up, which are opportunities to connect with your fellow alumni. And if you did get to see one of these cards that are out on the reception table, I'd invite you to take one on the way out if you haven't taken one. These are our key events going on for the year. So first, right around the corner, is a basketball game, a networking event at the Richmond UMass contest. It's going to be held on February 6th. So basically for the price of a ticket, you can come and network with us. We'll offer refreshments and food and hopefully a chance to network a little bit and be able to see a Spider victory. So we hope to see many of you there. And of course, many of you are probably familiar with the golf tournament. This is our signature event. We've done this every year since the beginning of the Alumni Society that we've come together. We usually net about 80 players. We raise about $5,000 for the MBA Scholarship Fund, and it's held this year at the Foundry Golf Club, which is a very, very nice golf course, and usually very, very hard to get onto, being that it's a private club. So we look forward to you being involved in that. So please look out for an invitation in your emails. And by the way, if you don't get emails currently from the MBA office, I'd invite you to contact us, contact Nick Minix. You can talk to us afterwards. Let's make sure you get on those lists so you get the invitations for future events. So lastly, I wanted to say that our board meetings that we hold every quarter are open. Yes, we have a core group of people that are elected, that work to put on the events that we are bringing here as an example. But going forward, we want as much involvement as we can get. In fact, the board itself is a networking opportunity, and it's actually brought me much closer to some of my MBA alumni that I didn't even realize I had. So I invite you to be part of that. So you can contact me or any member of the board. I'm sure you can find us all on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to be part of our discussions in the future, we very much welcome that, and we hope to see you at one of our meetings in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to turn your direction to my right on the stage, and so I can introduce our panelists. So immediately to my right is Scott McRoberts. He leads the Virginia Council of CEOs, which is an independent, nonprofit association serving CEOs of small and mid-sized companies. He launched the organization in the year 2000 and has served as its executive director since. And previously, Scott was a senior executive at the Greater Richmond Center Chamber of Commerce. He is a graduate of James Madison University and has a master's in public administration from Virginia Commonwealth University. So a little bit about the Virginia Council of CEOs. They've grown considerably since its founding. They started with 25 initial members and have grown to 190 members today. So quite a remarkable growth, Scott. The council connects CEOs in a variety of venues for the purpose of sharing experiences while providing a safe haven for CEOs and business owners. When last surveyed, I think this is a startlingly fantastic statistic, that 84% of the council's members said that it was the most valuable business association to which they belonged. Please welcome Scott McRoberts. Our second panelist is our very own Dr. Dean Croushore, Professor of Economics and Rigsby Fellow here at the University of Richmond and Chair of the Economics Department. Dean is truly a leader in the field of economics. He came to the University of Richmond in 2003 after 14 years as an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Then he rose to the rank of vice president. Dean is a leading expert today in the field of real-time data analysis, which studies the implication of data revisions for forecasting, monetary policy, and macroeconomic research. He is author of the Money and Banking textbook, M&B, and co-author with Andrew Abel and Ben Bernanke of the intermediate level macroeconomic theory textbook, Macroeconomics. Dean is a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's Real-Time Data Research Center and teaches in the MBA program at Columbia. Please welcome Dr. Dean Croushore. Our third panelist is Mike Matthews, who is the president and CEO of Hankins & Anderson, which is a 200-person architectural firm and engineering firm specializing in worldwide design of secure, mission-critical facilities such as U.S. embassies. He holds a mechanical engineering degree from Old Dominion and is a fellow graduate of the Richmond MBA program. Mike has maintained steady involvement with the Robbins School, as well as a number of different councils and professional organizations. Notably, Mike is the current chair of the Virginia Council of CEOs, and he serves as the Executive Advisory Council for the VSU College of Businesses and the Board of Trustees for the VSU College of Business Foundation. Please welcome Mike Matthews. And finally, our moderator, Lacey Heiberger. In addition to being a fellow MBA alumnus from the University of Richmond, Lacey brings a very strong skill set and a broad background to the stage today. She's an experienced group facilitator, consultant, and strategist, and currently is serving as the Director of Strategic Planning for the Virginia Premier Health Plan. In this role, she oversees projects involving strategic planning, business development, marketing, and government relations. And prior to this, Lacey actually worked for GE's Healthcare's consulting arm assisting clients nationwide with operational efficiency and patient safety challenges. Lacey's also a registered nurse with former intensive care experience, so we feel very safe on stage here with you today.
It's been a while.
And holds, well, that's okay. Nobody get hurt anyway. And she holds additional degrees in economics from the University of Virginia and nursing from Georgetown University. Please welcome our moderator, Lacey Heiberger. So one final comment I'll make before I hand the event over to Lacey and the panel. We will allow some time at the end to questions, 4 questions. That'll start at about 8:45. So I'll interject when we get to that point, and we'll work with the audience, and hopefully there'll be plenty of questions and interaction at that point. So really looking forward to this discussion. And now, Lacey, I will turn the event over to you.
Great, thanks, Tony. So I think it's obvious, given those backgrounds, that we have both a great depth of experience on the stage and also great breadth. So the first thing I want to do is give each of you the opportunity to speak kind of within your realm. So we're going to start with Dean. And Dean, a significant portion of your background was in forecasting with the Federal Reserve. So I think we would all be very interested in getting your perspective on where the macroeconomy seems to be and where it may be headed.
Okay, so listening to an economist talk at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's a good thing there was lots of strong coffee out there. I'll just talk for just a few minutes about the general contours of the forecast as macroeconomists see it, and then I think the main thing to understand about where the economy is going is to understand where we are today and where we've come from. And the dominating effect of the forecast today is still the lingering after effects of the financial crisis in 2008. That really changed the economy once and for all, and it will be still many more years before all the effects of the financial crisis have gone away. What happened in the financial crisis is that people suffered a tremendous loss of wealth, especially housing wealth, but also financial wealth. On the housing side, we're seeing some recovery, and so wealth is getting better, but people are still working towards rebuilding the level of wealth relative to their income that they had in 2008 before the crisis. So that continues to dominate. As people get more income, they've been spending a little bit, but mostly saving or reducing debt and things like that. So that's why we haven't seen very strong growth in the economy since 2008. That's the main reason. The other thing that the financial crisis did was that it caused a credit crunch, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, and those of you in this room may know about that firsthand. And it also led us to re-regulate the banking system, put much more onerous regulations on, and that has slowed business growth and development. So the credit crunch, the changes in the banking system, the wealth effect, all of those combined with people's greater fear and uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future have held back consumption spending. So consumer spending growth has been much slower since 2008 than it was for the 20 years before that. Okay, so that's the dominant effect still. So I'll tell you about forecasts from a survey of professional forecasters that's done at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. It's sort of it's a measure of the average forecaster out in the market and what they think is going to happen in 2016. So on the real output side, a little bit faster than last year. We're going to grow around 2.5% or so. And that's based on consumption growth increasing just a little bit compared to last year. And some other factors are kind of mixed. The unemployment rate has fallen a lot more than forecasters thought it would last year. And their forecasts are based on the fact that they think we've hit sort of a natural rate of unemployment, that we're pretty close to 5% right now. Well, right now the official statistic is 5%, and we're not going to go much below that, but maybe a little bit in 2016. On the jobs front, the US economy is creating a lot of new jobs every month. Net new jobs are expected to average about 200,000 each month in 2016. That's slightly lower than in 2015, but not much. So that's still pretty good growth of jobs in the economy. It's a little bit more jobs per month than new people coming into the labor force. And so that's going to continue to help the economy grow a little bit, reduce the unemployment rate just a little bit more. Business investment, though, is going to be mediocre in 2016. It was not so great in 2015 after a good 2014. The reason is that because consumer spending isn't increasing that much, and because export markets are growing more slowly, businesses don't need to invest in new plant and equipment. So 2016 doesn't look like a good year for business investment. On the other hand, housing investment by people in new homes especially, is going to do even better this year than it did in 2015, which was better than 2014. But still, we're only about half of what we were in 2006. So we're going to get more houses built, but nowhere near where we were in the bubble, which is probably a good thing. What's the optimal level? If you look before 2003, when the sort of housing bubble started, we were making about 1.5 million housing units a year, and we're still pretty far below that. The tough part to forecast, and the most difficult variables to forecast, are interest rates and inflation. The relationship between interest rates and inflation has changed in the US and all over the world. We're actually seeing negative interest rates, which I said were impossible in both of my textbooks. We're seeing those in many countries around the world, so that's a little disturbing. How can that be? You're actually paying somebody to keep money for you. But it turns out there's some reasons why that can happen. The baseline forecast is that inflation in 2016 is going to rise back up towards 2% and stay a little bit below that this year. But that depends on what happens to energy prices. And in the last couple of weeks, we've seen energy prices just crumbling. And so it could be that inflation overall doesn't get back that close to 2% this year, but it might be 2017 before it starts to get there. The toughest call of all is interest rates. So it's nice not to work at the Federal Reserve anymore, because now I can talk about interest rates. when I was there, I could never even mention the word. But the thing is, how fast the economy grows is going to determine what the level of interest rates is. If the economy grows faster than this forecast, the Fed's going to raise rates faster and interest rates on the whole are going to go up more. But if things continue as they've been and we get slower growth and we get uncertainty all over the world, slowdown in China and other economies, and if inflation stays near zero, then the likelihood is that the Fed may not raise rates anymore this year and could even reduce them again. But there's tremendous error bands around the forecast for both inflation and interest rates. We just don't know what's going to happen. It's all going to be data driven. It's going to depend on developments both here and abroad. So, don't bet on interest rates moving any particular direction. We have almost no good idea what's going to happen with those. So that is my overall economic outlook.
Thank you.
So, Lacey.
So now that we have that larger macroeconomic perspective, Scott, I'd like to move to you. And if you could just kind of bring that home to Virginia and talk a little bit about your organization, which is essentially the impetus for us meeting today, how that was developed, and then also the survey itself. Give us a little bit of your perspective.
Sure. So Virginia Council of CEOs is about 15 years old. We started, there was a vacuum in the market for CEO roundtables, peer roundtables for CEOs of small companies. We started it up, and now, as Tony said, there's 190 CEOs participating in the organization. Most of those CEOs are in the Richmond area. We have a few from farther afield. So the survey is reflective of that. Our sort of captive audience for the survey is our membership, although there are others that participate. So most of that is from the Richmond area. I want to describe what our members look like. They don't look like the CEO of Tony's company. They look like a small business owner or a partner in a firm like Mike's. Our members run companies that range from 1 to 200 million, basically, 5 to 800 employees in that range. But the bulk of them, I would say, are below 15 million. So they're small companies. Most of our CEOs are the owner or one of the owners. So we're a small business organization, and the survey data, I think, reflects that. Just want to fill you in on what we do. Our primary mission is to connect CEOs so they can learn from each other. It's a lonely thing to run a small business. So what we do is provide a peer roundtable format where they can join us, become part of a small group of 8 to 10 CEOs that then meets monthly, learns from each other, shares their problems, their opportunities, and benefits from the experience of each other. And then beyond that, with 190 CEOs and some sponsors involved, we connect in various other ways, but that's the core of it. So about 6 years ago, 2010, we came up with the idea for this survey and started working with Richard Coughlin on it. And I'm an English major, so let me preface all my comments with that. So I found what I thought was a really good model, which was the Business Roundtable survey, and you may be familiar with that. The Business Roundtable is CEOs of the largest companies in the United States, and we're at the other end of that. But their model is so simple. It's 3 questions, basically, once a quarter. Sales, capital investment, and hiring. Are they going to be up, the same, or down the next 6 months? And those are the 3 questions. And from the answers to those questions, there's a calculation. Again, I'm an English major. There's some calculation that somebody does that produces an index once a quarter. So that's the model we used. And I'm always fascinated to look at what the Business Roundtable survey is doing and what ours is doing. You know, the small companies in Richmond and the biggest companies in the United States. And they're usually very different. The Business Roundtable survey tends to go up and down very quickly in a range of about 50 points. Our survey tends to fluctuate less wildly within a range of about 20 points. That may be because we're in Richmond in Virginia, which is a fairly stable economic region. That may be because small businesses are more stable by nature and less reactive to market forces. I don't know. Again, I'm an English major. So that's what we've been doing. I think that sort of frames up who we are and what we're doing with the survey.
Great.
Is that good?
And lastly, Mike is our representative from private industry. Can you give us your perspective as the CEO of a company within that environment?
Sure. First, let me say that I got 2 Bs in MBA school and econ was one of them. So I'm really proud to be talking at an economic breakfast here at the Richmond MBA school. I'm not sure how that happened, but I actually have 2 perspectives. First is a federal contractor. Like 98% of our work is federal, and we're about a $40 million a year company. And the federal contractors have a very different economy than the private sector that we mostly hear about, and I think that Dean is referring to here to a large degree. We saw a 10% compound annual growth rate 2008 to 2012. When the rest of the economy, particularly AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction industry, was sucking wind, we were doing really, really well. Then 2012 hit. What happened in 2012? Budget cuts, sequestration, drawdown of military, all these sort of things. We then went from a 10% compound annual growth rate to a 20% decline for 2 years. So that was pretty painful. It's not just us. I mean, being in the federal markets, I talked to a lot of folks. It's anecdotal evidence, granted, but this is not uncommon in federal markets. So our recession was 4 years behind the greater economic recession as a federal contractor. Fortunately, it only lasted a couple of years, so we're back on the uptick now. I'm more than happy to say I had a 15% growth last year. I'm anticipating about 30% this year. So things are moving back ahead. Fortunately for us and a lot of folks. Recently we've seen these closures of the, or cutbacks at Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Newport News Shipyard. A lot of these big defense contractors are being impacted too. 2012 is an example, defense spending decreased by $42.7 billion. The following year, $34.2 billion. So these are significant cuts. Virginia is a defense state. We do have a very stable economy. One of the reasons is the federal government and the spending we do there. And I'm not sure what the statistics show the impact of Virginia is, but we know anecdotally again that Newport News Norfolk Naval Shipyard, some of these other folks are having pretty severe, tough time with it. So the bad news is we also had a recession. The good news is it was much shorter and we're coming out of it. So I also took the opportunity to look at some national polls in our industry. I would like to believe that from what I understand, and actually heard an economist validate this at one time, that we're kind of a leading indicator. One of the leading economic indicators is building permits for residential construction. Well, they can't get building permits until we do planning and design as architects and engineers, right? So we're going to be 6-12 months ahead of that curve. So I'd like to think that if you're seeing the architecture and engineering community start taking off economically, the economy will follow. On the other side, we typically tend to lag later, particularly on the public funding side. The taxes usually come in later than the economic downturn because of the way taxes are collected over time. So we're a little out of step there, but still think it's advantageous to take a look at our industry. So the last year, I interviewed about a dozen folks throughout Virginia in firms, some small, some large firms in our industry, and most folks were in the 15% growth rate last year, which is pretty good. We're talking about economic growth of 2-4%, and I think you were mentioning something like that. So for an industry like ours to be growing at 15% last year is, I think, a pretty good indicator of where we are and where we're heading, and that includes some defense folks still not doing extremely well. So then I said, how about the next 12 months? What do you all think there? Engineers and architects aren't necessarily the most optimistic people in the world. They're very creative people, but maybe not optimistic. Yet every one of them was anticipating 5 to 15% growth in the coming year. Every one of them was anticipating increased backlog. So I think the anticipation of 5 to 15% growth on top of 15% growth, trailing 12 months, is a pretty strong statement for where we are as an economy in Virginia and the firms that hopefully are some indication of where the economy is heading based on that. When I look at the national polls for the organization called PSMJ, that's unique to our industry, the firms that saw growth over the last 12 months outnumbered firms that didn't by about 2 to 1. The projection for firms that are going to see growth in the next 12 months, or actually the next quarter, I think the survey was 6 to 1. So that's a really good sign. They've tripled in terms of the ratio of the firms that think they're going to see growth in the next few months over what they've seen in the last number of months. Some of the challenges we're facing right now, which again I think speaks to the economy, is labor rates. All we have is labor. We're not a capital intensive industry. We have people and computers, and that's kind of it, office space and desks. We don't have machinery and production equipment. We have people. So a lot of the industry, public and private, saw wage freezes for a number of years during the recession, 2008, 9, 10, et cetera. And our industry was no exception to that. Our business was. We continued to do 2-3% kind of annual increases over that period of time. But what we're seeing now are anticipated increases, or actually current increases of about 6 to 6.5% over what they were a year ago. So we're really starting to see the labor market in our industry tighten up. We're having a lot of trouble finding, particularly lead senior electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, some of these folks that do our work. They're very difficult to find. If you have kids going into school, engineering, it's the way to go, please. They're in very high demand and they're commanding very high salaries. And like I said, we're looking at about a 6% increase in that. That is our cost, is labor. So we're going to see our entire industry revenues go up, I think, as a result of that.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to dig into the survey itself a little bit more, and I may direct the questions, but please feel free to look and see if you have something to say about it as well. But Scott, could you kind of give us a feel for the tone of the survey this year, how that may have changed in the past, and as the representative for a large group of people, what differences do you see in that? How does the survey reflect your membership?
Well, unlike engineers and architects, entrepreneurs and small business owners are very optimistic just by nature. They have to be to take the risk that they take, to take the gamble of running a small business. So I think the survey reflects that. I would say, and I'll speak anecdotally, really, from my contact with all of these entrepreneurs. The last few quarters have been, I've sensed, I don't know if it's optimism, but what I see is that these people who are running these small and mid-sized companies are as busy as they've ever been the last 3 to 4 quarters. They are running hard to sell as much as they can. The customers are calling. They are understaffed, trying to keep up with that. And then all of a sudden this quarter, or really going into the holiday season, this survey was actually taken in December. I think the survey is very reflective of what I saw. It's like, we think it's not exactly storm clouds, but not so sure about 2016. It doesn't look like, looking ahead doesn't look like the past few quarters. So I wouldn't say they're pessimistic, but I would say they're unsure that they're going to get the same sort of level of activity and growth that they've had the last few quarters.
And there was a significant difference in the reactions to the Fed's rate increase this last quarter, despite the fact that the increase has been anticipated for quite some time now. So, Dean, can you take us through why it may be that the sentiment may have changed so suddenly?
Yeah, I think people often overreact to what the Federal Reserve does, especially when it's been talked about in the newspaper for year after year. When will they finally raise rates? I mean, they raised rates 25 basis points. That's 0.25%. It's still extremely low. The way macroeconomists view it is interest rates are still incredibly accommodative, meaning they're supporting the economy, they're helping it grow. Nobody is not investing because interest rates are too high, right? Interest rates are not a consideration. They're so low now, and they're remaining low. So, people tend to overreact to the news, but the reality is this had no appreciable impact on anything that they do. I mean, 25 basis points is nothing. Now, if it goes up, if the Fed raises interest rates by 5 percentage points, that will matter. But this is trivial, not even worth thinking about. It's just, it's news, there was this big event, everybody's anticipating it, so people tended to say, oh, that changes the game. No, it doesn't. It's 25 basis points, it's nothing. So, yes.
Okay. And one of the things that I noticed in looking over the survey is that outlook index dropped in Q4 to the lowest rate since Q2 of 2014. Yet the projections for sales and for spending and employment over the next 6 months remained relatively stable over that time. So any of you that have something to say about why that may be, please feel free to jump in.
I think some of the stay the sames moved to decrease. The increases stayed about the same, is what you're saying. And some of the folks who said employment, sales are going to stay the same, moved down to they're going to decrease in the coming 2 quarters. So that's what affected the index numerically. Again, I think it's the sense that things are not going to be quite as good going forward that they were the past couple of quarters.
But one of the things about the survey is that it's, some of these industries that people are in are seasonal, and so if you just look at this survey, which came in the fourth quarter, compared to the fourth quarter of the year before, fourth quarter of the year before, and so on, then this is a little drop from a year earlier, but it's not a big drop. So it seems to me one way to interpret the survey is things are maybe not quite as good as they thought a year ago, but they're still higher than the 3 or 4 previous years. So I think it's not really a negative sign, it's just a slight decrease in the growth. So basically I would read the survey as saying, yeah, growth is still going to be about the same in 2016 as 2015, just a slightly bit slower, but certainly better than it was in the previous years.
Sure.
I actually have an observation, a question for Dean, for the question and answer period, from the panel at least.
Take it away.
We're looking at expecting company employment growth is about 2 to 1 over capital spending, which I find to be very interesting. And I would assume there are a couple of things at play here. One is we're a service economy, so we don't need a lot of capital expenditure to hire people necessarily. But it seems the other thing is there excess capacity in capital right now, in fixed capital within organizations, so they're able to staff back up. Or do you have a theory as to why that's a 2 to 1?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the 2 to 1 ratio is that crucial, but as you said, services matter, and then business investment is going to be pretty mediocre this year, in part because there may be a little bit of overcapacity already, so they're just not seeing the need to add more. I think people will get added before capital gets added, so that may be part of the result.
So Mike, I'm going to put that back to you as a company that deals in really infrastructure. How would you use that result in the survey to plan?
Well, so much of our infrastructure spending on our industry is public infrastructure. And there is finally a 2-year transportation bill for, I forget if I did transportation work, I can tell you exactly how much. A huge multi-billion-dollar 2-year transportation bill, which is going to have a very positive impact on our industry as a whole. A lot of our industry is made up of transportation and infrastructure companies. But going back to this question, as it relates to my business, I think, I've got a whole lot more desks than I have people right now. So I could probably add 40 people or 50 people without batting an eye. I'd have to buy a couple of computers, but no more desks or real estate or anything like that. So I think that's probably a big part of it as we're back on the upswing. A lot of the fixed assets are still in place. But yeah, infrastructure I think is going to see, the transportation bill, I don't know if y'all saw this morning, they've approved 7 more miles of that nightmare between Richmond and Hampton Roads to expand the interstate there. So we're seeing more and more of that. There's more and more attention to our failing infrastructure and bridges and things like that. So I'm very optimistic that the public, the legislators are starting to get it, that our infrastructure is failing as a country. American Council of Engineering Companies is something I'm also very involved with. And we have legislative advocacy that worked very hard to try to get this transportation bill through. So I think it's going to have a very, very positive impact.
Okay. So your company obviously does a lot of infrastructure work internationally as well, and to any of the panelists, just interested in how the macroeconomy in our country may be affected by a lot of the uncertainty in the international environment. And Dean, you're probably the best.
Yeah. Right. So, the thing about it is that shortly after the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates very low and started doing quantitative easing, reducing long-term interest rates. So the US economy actually came out of that recession very quickly compared to other countries. And in some places, like in the European Central Bank, they cut interest rates for a while, then they raised them. And so their performance has been much worse than in the US. So part of what's happening, we're still recovering from 2008. The US economy is actually doing really well, and many of these other countries, many countries in Europe, Japan, they just haven't fully recovered nearly to the extent that we have. So that makes us growing faster, so we're buying more of their goods. They're growing slower, they're buying less of ours. That's, especially now, propelling the dollar upward. And especially they're cutting interest rates, we're raising just a little bit, ours. And so there's, for financial investors, they're moving money to the US, that's driving the dollar up, and that's changing the, obviously the exchange rate rise is going to reduce profits from US firms that have operations overseas. And that's probably a temporary thing. But what we really need to happen is for the rest of the world's economies to do better. That will improve everyone, and it'll help stabilize the dollar. It'll let us increase our exports to other countries and reduce our trade deficit. So we actually, some people are complaining that countries are just doing competitive devaluations. Everybody's trying to cut the value of their own currencies. Not really. It's really an equilibrium outcome because their countries are weak. Their economies are very weak, and so that's why their currencies are falling. So we would like the ECB to continue to do quantitative easing. We want Europe to get stronger. We want Japan to figure out something, because they've had 20 years of a mess. And the stronger those economies are, the better we will do. So that's kind of the current situation. And with China, China's growth has been phenomenal, and now it's slowing down. That's not a surprise. We knew that was going to happen. It's got to happen. Every developing country goes through that period. It's just, it can be painful when you've been growing 10% and now the growth is more like 5%. That looks like a real big slowdown. So, we're rooting for China a lot. We would like China to continue to grow and prosper and buy American products, especially. But the growth rate is going to be a little bit slower. They're going to go through some pains right now, and we just have to deal with that. And it should be temporary, and then they'll kind of get back to equilibrium at some point.
Okay, thanks. And Scott, with the latest survey, were there any questions that stood out to you as very, very different from the past, or any particular industries that seemed to stand out?
The usual respondent number is 60 to 80 respondents. And I think, and I'm working with Randy on this now, as we get a larger respondent base, we'll start sort of breaking it out by industries to do some analysis, but we haven't done that so far, so
Okay.
we don't have any data on that. There's nothing surprising here at all. It's
Okay. And Mike, how well does this survey reflect what you are feeling in your company and your industry? You obviously have a very strong perspective from inside that, but how would you use the survey going forward?
I don't know that it does a whole lot for me as someone trying to run a business, quite frankly. But I'm so dependent upon federal financing.
Right.
I'm actually going to be dependent next year on the election, I think, and what changes we may see there relative to federal spending, where that federal spending lies. It will have a big impact, not only on my firm, but I think on Virginia. Mm-hmm. With these pretty severe cuts in defense spending, if that's reversed, depending on the next administration, that could have a pretty positive impact. But I don't know that I'm rely a whole lot on this personally. And I think it's reflective of our industry. I think from what I've seen, talking to folks in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, it's pretty consistent, I think, with the smaller economic forecast for the businesses that are in the council.
Okay. So we've spoken about it some, but the Small Business Administration reports that over 90% of Virginia's businesses are categorized as small. And some estimates suggest that as many as 50% of jobs in the US are provided by companies with fewer than 500 employees. So can each of you speak a little bit about the importance of small businesses in our economy, and then particularly within Virginia? Bring it home.
So I was working with the Greater Richmond Partnership on a project a year or so ago, and some of the research that they did showed that, and it was particular to Virginia and then extrapolate to Richmond, but the research said that when you're looking at net job growth, the companies that produce net new jobs are the 10 to 100 employee businesses. That the smaller ones don't, net, a lot of them fail. The larger ones are, reducing and expanding, not producing net new jobs, but it's that 10 to 100 where the innovation occurs, where new ideas happen, new products, new services, new markets. And so, that's where we live, and we're proud that that's what we do. So I think the Greater Richmond Partnership's interest was how do we provide an ecosystem and an environment that supports those kind of companies so that we can fuel that growth in that segment. And we're a part of that. Certainly the things that Robbins School does is a part of that as well.
So I'll just say that in a growing economy, we want all businesses to grow. I don't like this small versus large thing. Oh, we create more jobs than you. No, we do. We want small businesses to become large. We want tiny businesses to become small. Businesses with less than 50 people to get bigger, and that's the growth of the economy. That's what we're looking for. So I wouldn't say, depending on how you slice and dice what you define as a small business, under 50 employees or under 500, they create, 1/2 to 2/3 of all the jobs in the economy. And 99.7% of all businesses have less than 500 employees. So it's most of the businesses. Yeah. And so, yes, we do want them to do well. But we want large corporations to do well, too. So,
I thought your 50% number was a little low for fewer than 500. You're saying it's 90-some. Right?
99% of all businesses have less than 500, and that's 2/3 of all employees. So, yeah, depending on how you count.
Yeah. Okay. Either way, 50% I thought was a little low, but I forgot to ask you about that. Anyhow, as federal government has tons of small business set-aside work. They have small business, 8A, Hub Zone, minority, disabled advantage, women-owned businesses, you name it. And right now, 92%, I believe, of architecture and engineering firms in the country qualify as small businesses by the federal government standards. I'm not one of them, right? So I'm doing about 50% of my revenue, $20 million a year for Department of State. I do not hold one single prime contract with the Department of State because I'm unqualified, because I'm not small business, woman-owned, disabled veteran. So yeah, I'm whining a little bit. We're kind of getting squeezed out. What the administration did 2 years ago, they raised the small business set-aside standard from 4 million to 14 million for engineering, I think, into 12 million for architects. So now 90-some% are small businesses. So now they're either going to give just about anybody anything as a small business or some other set-aside, or it's the mega projects that go to the mega firms, and we're kind of stuck in the middle, right? So it makes it tough to be a medium-sized business, at least by federal standards. But I love working with small business folks at the council. They're a bunch of great entrepreneurial spirit folks, but it's a little frustrating as a federal contractor not being one of them.
Absolutely. Okay, and just last question for you all. If there is one thing that you feel people should watch out for this year, what should we be looking for in the news to all get wealthy and retire in 2017?
Yes, so a lot of people are worried about the stock market and what it's doing, and I'll just say that there's an old quip in economics that the stock market has predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. So just don't pay attention to it.
Economist humor.
Funny. So the small businesses I work with, the ones that are succeeding and really thriving are the ones that are very entrepreneurial, who are innovating, who are looking for new ideas, new markets, launching new businesses within the business. That's not rocket science. That's just entrepreneurship.
I think federal and state spending on infrastructure is a positive. The Obama administration recognized that through its shovel-ready program 7 years ago. Unfortunately, they learned very quickly that drawings aren't sitting on the shelf waiting to be built. But the theory was correct that infrastructure does fuel economic growth, whether it's transportation funding, whether it's water, wastewater treatment systems, things like that. It will fund and employ a whole lot of people. So I think I would keep an eye on infrastructure funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Awesome. Thanks a lot. So we're going to open up to questions from the audience. First, I'd like to say I work for a $16 billion company, so please keep me in your thoughts. We'll go ahead and, I just asked, just wait for us to bring the microphone to you. We'll give the microphone to you, and then you can go ahead and ask your questions. So, please. First one's always all the way in the back. No, Allison's first.
Me first. Hi, I'm Alice Scott, class of '09 MBA, and nice to see so many of my classmates here. And I'm currently in real estate with Long & Foster, so it's interesting to also talk about the housing market. I know it's a very positive, well, we've been hearing from economists is very positive for the housing market, so that's good for me. But one of the numbers that really stood out on this survey that I didn't like the look of, and so again, I don't know if it's this turn of the tide from the optimism to maybe a little bit more controlled optimism maybe, but from Q3 to Q4 of this year, from going to 0% decrease of employment in the next 6 months to 8.82. To me, that was the starkest change and probably indicate, the biggest change that caused the index decrease. But I just want to hear a little bit more about that because I think hiring is such a big economic indicator, and to see that big of a change from all the other numbers on this survey just seemed concerning.
Sure. Just from memory, I think that's the first time that number has been 0. So that was Q3 that 0 said they were going to decrease hiring. And as I said, my sense was people were really going hard, hiring lots of people and trying to meet demand and grow their business. So it doesn't worry me. I think that's an outlier, that 0%. So that's my thought.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. Joe Kimmick, MBA 80, retired for the last 5 years. Dean, I think I'm going to address this to you. In your economic forecast, how are you and the fellow economists building in the cratering of the energy and the raw material, and whether or not is that a positive or a negative? And then I guess maybe a second point is the FRB looking at the possible loan write-offs, in the energy and material space, especially the first half of this year?
Sure. Great. Good question. So energy has been a big issue in the last few months, especially. Actually, for the past few years, we've seen, thanks to fracking and other technologies, we've seen the price of energy just decline, and the decline is a lot more pronounced than we thought it would be. So, especially recently. So, for the economy as a whole, for the world economy as a whole, this is fabulous. I mean, energy figures into so many things as a cost of final production. So prices have to be going down. Corporate profits should be up in energy-intensive industries, except for the folks building energy supply equipment. And so we are seeing, shakeout in that industry in the sense that nobody wants to buy an oil drilling rig anymore and so on. But for the economy as a whole, it's a very, very big positive step. The Federal Reserve studies everything. Energy has certainly been on their radar screen for quite some time, and yeah, it definitely factors into what it is. But what we're waiting for is for people to realize this is a positive, not a negative. The fact that corporate profits are down in the energy producing sector means corporate profits are going to be up in the airline industry, any transportation industry, shipping industries, lots of other industries. So we're going to see, as this year unfolds, we're going to see a lot more positives than negatives.
Yes.
I'll go
No problem. Here you go.
So Dean, you talked about the unemployment rate coming down from about 10% to 6-7 years ago to about 5 now, an increase of jobs about 200,000 per month, net new job increase. But you also talked about a mismatch in your area of being able to find engineers. But we haven't seen any wage growth yet, or no significant wage growth yet. What's going to take for employees to start seeing some benefits of the growing economy?
Great. So the labor market, overall is doing much better than it had been. We are seeing lots of reports, like as Mike talked about, where highly skilled workers are in short supply, and their wages are growing much faster than the average, which is about 2.5%. But there are still, even though the unemployment rate is 5%, which is about what we think of as the natural rate, there's still a lot of people who would be considered underemployed. People are working part-time because they can't find a full-time job. People who have dropped out of the labor force because they think their prospects are not so good, especially if they don't have skills. And so, I think that's all fairly consistent with a wage growth of around 2.5%. My suspicion is that, especially if we keep adding 200,000 net new jobs a month, we're going to pull some of those people who are underemployed back into full-time employment. We're going to have more people looking for the training that can, provide workers for Mike and other companies that are looking for highly skilled workers. But we're in this transition period. It might take a while before we fill all that. So I think the baseline forecast is for wage growth to pick up a little bit in 2016, a little bit more the following year, and so on as we get back to more normal labor market conditions.
So while the next person is thinking of their question, I actually have one. Since I'm holding the mic, I'm allowed to do that. So it's been a while now since we've had economic stimulus packages. I can still remember $787 billion from Obama, another $700 billion to Wall Street. I remember getting a check in the mail from George W. Bush. So I'm wondering going forward, especially with it being political season, what kind of effect do these kinds of stimuli and programs have on the economy? And when we think about voting, and if there are economic struggles, how should we be thinking about who we should support and what kinds of government programs we would want out there to actually help the economy and not just make a superficial kind of impact?
Yeah, great question. So in response to a shock like the financial crisis, it's beneficial for the government to do something, to do the types of spending that are actually beneficial in the long run. Like part of the package that came out in 2009 was infrastructure spending, right? As Mike noted, infrastructure in the US is crumbling in many ways, and we could have done a lot more to build that. But to the extent that we do stupid things like first-time homebuyer credit and clunker, cash for clunkers program, what we saw when we did that is huge increase in home sales when the program was on, and then a giant drop once the program ends. Cash for clunkers. Big increase in new car sales, and then a big drop. It doesn't solve anything long term. So the better thing would be to give lots of money to Mike's company, just shovel all these federal dollars to him.
Pay attention.
And let him build this stuff. So, I think the other thing that happened, of course, is that we greatly increased the ratio of government debt to GDP from it was about 40% before the crisis, and now 70 to 80% afterwards for debt that's not held by government entities. And so that's a big cost that we're going to bear for many years to come. So to the extent that we did stupid things with the money, we're going to pay for that long term. To the extent that we did some infrastructure spending, we should have done more, then that has long-term benefits. And so we don't mind paying for that.
He didn't tell you who to vote for.
Yeah, that was clever. Okay, any other final questions or thoughts? Okay. Oh, no, Wendy, okay.
Hi, Wendy Jewell, class of 2007 from the MBA program. You hear so much of healthcare costs, and that has more of a bigger impact on the small businesses. As the survey comes out, what is going to be the long-term impact of a lot of these healthcare changes on the growth?
A point of pain for small business owners for sure. And particularly for business owners 50 plus with a large low-income workforce, makes it just economically not viable to offer health insurance. So there are a lot of companies in that ballpark are having to make a hard decision to end their plan, send people to the marketplace. But you know, like anything else in a small business, it's a cost of doing business. You just have to plan for and accommodate. And I have members who complain and vociferously shoot fire and damnation at the people who are changing our healthcare system, politicians and others. And I have others who say, you know, it's the environment we operate in. We're just going to deal with it. You know, why waste any energy complaining? So.
A lot of our employees blame it on us, the company, the employer. It's like, because we have no control over this. But we have had to change from HMOs to high deductible health care plans, and we still give quite a bit towards that as much as we can without being penalized. But it's kind of frustrating when these things are imposed on us. We're doing everything we can do to try to keep costs down, and the employees blame it on management for raising their health care. Well, why don't y'all go out and shop? Let me come with you. That kind of stuff. It's very frustrating for us, and it's a huge expense. It's our third highest expense in our company is health care.
Okay, great. Well, we've come up on 9 o'clock. Wendy, thank you for your final question. So I just want to say again, thank you to our panelists and Lacey. I appreciate you taking the time to give us your insights. So let's please thank our folks up on the stage with a round of applause. Few final words. If you have a business card, we do plan on doing this annually. There's a blue bowl on the registration table when you come up the stairs out there. So please write down on the back of your business card where you think the Dow Jones Industrial Average will finish at the end of 2016. And then I'm going to take that bowl and make some investments so I can benefit from that. So that makes it a lot of fun. We'll give a prize out next year to whoever comes closest to that. Don't forget to check out our events this year. Please grab one of these cards as well. We hope to see you very soon in the future. And so again, thank you, Scott, Dean, Mike, and Lacey for everything today and taking the time out of your busy schedule. So once again, thank you. And drive safely and please stay warm in the SO and have a wonderful day.